Hello and welcome to Tennis Manager 2023 to be precise. I said I had something a little bit different for you this week, and this is that. Now, this isn't going to be a proper full series, this is just a one-off review assessment of the game. Quite frankly, I don't think there is the audience for a full series for this, but as a relatively robust manager game in the management space, I figured it was worthwhile me checking it out and letting you know what I felt about it. Now, full disclosure, I did acquire this game the week of release. It's not a review copy or anything like that. And I did play through a few seasons the weekend of release. Unfortunately, life got in the way and I had to prioritize content-wise the ongoing series that I already had going. So now, with both of those series having concluded and with Wimbledon just passed, I figured now was a good time to knock out a couple of more seasons and bring you this assessment. First and foremost, this is a page that you'll probably recognize from most management sims. Your inbox, it's very reminiscent, it's color-coded, which is quite nice, but I will say whilst we're on this inbox, the game is made by a French company, Rebound. Now, I'm only saying that because it's relevant to a couple of things. One, I don't think they're a particularly large studio. Secondly, the French aspect does get a little bit obvious, or the fact that it's not English as a first speaking language does become a little obvious in a few places. Now, this message seems to be okay. We are on the verge of a tournament final with our created player here, Matthew Bailey, who doesn't have a face in the inbox, but I assure you he does have one. It does tend to rear its head mostly in interview questions. Quite often they misgender the player as well. But in terms of the functionality of the game and its day-to-day workings, that's obviously just a text issue. It doesn't affect the way the game plays. I'll also say, at this stage as well, if I flip over to the men's rankings right now, as the game is 5 years in, at the end of 5 years, Sebastian Korda is number 1. He's our player. Whilst the correct names are here, the game doesn't ship with the correct names. I believe there is a bunch of players who are associated with it and do have their real names in, but the majority of players aren't. This is using a real name database and real pictures associated with it, which is the only thing in the Steam Workshop for this game, so easy to find. But even without that, essentially players like Carlos Alcaraz are in the game as Carlos Alcatraz, and I believe Djokovic is like Jorovic. So all they do is just shift a letter around. Like this Denis Shapovalov might be Shapovalov rather than Lov, for instance. It's very copy my home up, but don't make it obvious. But I'll flip over to my creative player right now and say that I have thrown myself in at the absolute deep end. I used the Creator Academy feature and the Creator player that follows it. You can start with an established academy. I'm not sure if they're real academies or not, but they're established in the game with personnel already. I started with a brand new institute with the intention to build it up with my coach at the lowest level to build him up. I should just briefly mention, I started my coach at level 3, but I'm now level 6. For people who are achievement hunters, there is an achievement to reach level 3. So if you want to do that, start at level 2, because you don't get it by being level 3. You have to actually go from 2 to 3, which makes sense. But for achievement hunters, just be aware of that one. Otherwise, you're going to have to go back and start at level 2 and play through a season and get to level 3. Probably only take you a season because I went straight from 3 to 4, 4 to 5, and then 5 to 6 have taken a little bit longer. And I've just done this season at level 6 and not gone up to level 7, although technically it's not completed. So we'll see on that one. In regards to the difficulty of the save, this is my created player. 2023 started as a junior, technically. 2024, he was in the senior system at 353, ended at 109 2025, ended at 64 2026, ended at 70 in 2027. He's currently at rank 67. I am finding it difficult for him to get a breakthrough. That's partially because you do have to be a little bit clever in the way that you do your tournaments. This is probably the most intricate part of the game, if I'm completely honest. Game plans are relatively intricate in the sense that there are options here, but those options only factor in when you're on juice or advantage. Returning first serve and returning second serves have different responses as well, as do just general rallies, which are split into normal, attacking and defending. And you do get to set up 3 of them for them to develop so that you get effectively 3 to go at any point. Honestly, because tennis is effectively a lot more of a lottery than, say, football, where you know the 19 teams you're going to be playing, you know the division that you're playing in, you know your level that you're playing in, and what might be stronger in that respect. This becomes a little bit arbitrary, because you effectively have to try and build it for what your player's strong at, or what they think they're strong at, and then just hope for the best that your opponents don't match up well to it. And if they do, maybe have one that's a little bit adjacent, that might work slightly better against them. But quite honestly, I've just set this and not touched it, which, might be working against me here a little bit, but I've just sort of set it and left it. But choosing your tournaments through tournament registration is the most technical part of the game, because you have to try and obviously be a part of the Grand Slams. That's the main goal, be a high enough ranking to be in those. But beyond them, you want to be in the highest ranking tournaments possible, but you also need to be in tournaments that you want to be able to win. And it's that balancing act that is probably the most intricate part of this. So for instance, this year, I entered him in the qualifying rounds of the ATP Masters 1000 tournaments, and he failed at the first hurdle in all of them and got 0 points. Now, they're not being included because it includes the top 18 best tournaments out of the last 26 played. But unfortunately, it's also including his round 64 exits of City Open and the Rio Open, which got him 0 points, but not the Barcelona Open, which got him 4 points, for instance, or any of these round of 32 250 tournaments that got him 10 points. So he's got these 2 0-pointers, but none of these 10-pointers, or this 9-pointer here. It's not a massive loss. It's this interesting balancing act between what will give you points and what won't. For instance, he has won an Tour 80 Challenger this year, which got him 75, and a 125, his best win yet, which gave him 175. But in everything else, he's been a little bit lacking. He did get to the round of 64 in the last 3 Grand Slam tournaments, which is the furthest he's got in any of them, frankly, which is also reflected in his goal, which was to get to the round of 32. That's what he decided on. That was the lowest he would go and be happy with. Got to round 64, he's kind of okay with it. He's got to the round of 16 in one of these tournaments, and he's happy with that. Not quite made his ATP ranking, so his satisfaction is about half and half. Frankly, this is all arbitrary, because occasionally there are checkpoints. There's one at the end of the season, there's one not too long before the end of the season, where players will come to you if they're upset and they want to leave because they've not met their goals. The options then, and there's no way to search your inbox, so I can't go back far enough accurately to find it. Here, contract termination requests come through from the players if they haven't met their targets. Now, frankly, that's largely because this player was utterly useless all season for me. Annoyingly, they won Wimbledon the year before, but this year they've won basically nothing. Barely got past the first round of any major tournament and have plummeted down the rankings as a result. I'm going to get rid of them at the end of the year, but I figured I'd see them through to the end. They come through 2 options. One, terminate. And then the other one is, we'll change things, but you'll stay on till the end of your commitment. That feels like it's going to be a negotiation thing, as I should move out of the way so you can see that sentence down here. That feels like it should be a negotiation, but it isn't. It's just basically, I'm going to hold you hostage until the end of the year, and you'll never leave. So there's not really much sense of peril in losing players in this respect, because they don't leave if you just click that button. As for the other parts of this, staff-wise, it's a little bit unobvious. I still haven't set this guy onto training, but it's a little bit unobvious how things work precisely in regards to training via this. Now, staff members have a experience level, which sometimes feels largely arbitrary because, for instance, Claudia Jaramillo here is confirmed level 6 of 9, has 13 and 17 in pretty much most of the technical parts. You'll find that trainers tend to be either good at technical, physical, or mental. That's it. So this chap's very good at all technical things and a bit of mental, but not spins, precisely. Or Iglesias here, who is 7 of 9 experience level, is 20 in movement, 16 in physical, and good on mental. So he does both of those quite well. Whereas the very experienced 8 of 9 trainer here is 18, 17, 15. So the experience level seems largely arbitrary, but it does affect their willingness to join you depending on how good your academy is. Obviously, the higher experience level is, the less likely they're going to join you if your academy isn't good enough. Sometimes their attributes are no better than players who are of a lower level. There's a general trend towards the positive in this respect. Some of them just quite frankly aren't any better. Say Marchand here, 18 serve, the rest of his technicals look pretty solid. He's 6 of 9. And that Maria Tudor here only has 20 in tactics, but 15 mental, and the movement isn't solid either. So it's an interesting system that I don't really quite work out. And obviously, the more experienced they are, the more they demand wage-wise, typically as well. As for the academy side of things, their objectives are, again, largely arbitrary. For instance, I am failing the satisfaction goals because my players will always set unrealistic goals for themselves and not meet them. Although, frankly, to be fair, that's because one of them has been rubbish, and I did expect them to meet those goals that I set, and they haven't. But some of these seem largely arbitrary. For instance, I'm failing both of these. I failed both of these last year, increasing the reputation of the academy and the satisfaction thing. Failed both of them last year, no problems. Recruiting one top 20 player and the financial balance and the nationality thing down here was enough to get me through. So again, they seem kind of arbitrary financially First season was a bit difficult because I only had youth players and they don't bring in a lot of money. But after that point, we've sort of been largely okay. But it seems to be balanced quite well, the finances, without never being too dangerous. Infrastructure-wise, if I go back over here, top academies in terms of the infrastructure is shown down here, and your performance by areas here. But these do show you what happens. It's just sort of minor bonuses for the most part. Swimming pool, level 2 gets you another trainer, but, more expenses. Sports HQ gives you more staff members, but again, more expenses. A lot of them seem like minor differences, and they don't really affect too much beyond giving you staff people, really, and passive incomes in certain areas. Like, even the bonuses for courts are just 1%. Level 2 allows you to sign another player, which is fine and everything. You can see right here, I've got 1 free slot to recruit someone. 6 players in the academy right now. I could recruit someone if I wanted to. Just realised their contracts are running out. I can only have 6 coaches, and coaches are 1 per player. So I could sign a 7th player, but I wouldn't be able to coach them or assign a physio to them because, again, that's 1 per player. Trainers can be assigned to 3 people at a time. And again, scouts are people I largely forget about. They work on a similar basis, as they'll research and tell you the potential of the players. Players have a current ability and a potential ability just like Football Manager, and they show you it in a star rating just like Football Manager. So here, currently 3.5 stars, potential 5 stars. Early bloomer as a progress will basically mean they'll reach their highest potential in their mid-20s. I don't know whether that means they'll drop off quicker afterwards. Say in the early 30s, they'll drop off faster. For instance, Kuda Matova here at 31 has failed to get past basically the first round of any major tournament this year. Is an early bloomer, level 4. Doesn't look like they're going down attribute-wise, but have really struggled this year for any form of form. So I don't know whether that is connected. I should also mention just academy-wise as well, the one thing that does seem to be a big deal, obviously business is just purely about income, but the medical centre does reduce the amount of time players are out when they get injured. So that is probably one of the more crucial ones, because the faster a player can get back into a tournament, the faster they can increase their ranking, the faster they bring money in for you, and so on and so forth. So that's probably actually the most important one of all, is the medical centre. And then search is search, which, yeah, it's an interesting system. You can add filters, minimum things. So for instance, if you're looking for a physical trainer, movement minimum 16, tick. Confirm. There you go. Then also add in the other movement attribute as well, just to make sure you got them in both sides. And they'll just come back to you saying, I'm either not interested in moving, not interested because of your reputation, or they'll start talking to you and negotiating with you. It's a pretty straightforward system staff-wise, thankfully, and it's the same deal with actual players. They'll just say, I'm not interested in your organisation just yet. But now the main thing here, final, as I've upgraded my clay courts. Now this is a tournament, despite him being a wildcard. He got wildcarded because he didn't make the other tournament at the end, sort of the end of season tournament. He's up against a person who is twice his seeding, really, but because he's a wildcard, Bailey wasn't seeded in this. He's played this guy before. There's a bit of a breakdown here. Now it says you can do some strategic adjustments here, which is great. He seems to be choosing on the body play today, but tells you your opponent is a top spin baseline and his strength of balance, footwork, and tactical skills, but his weaknesses are smash and composure, which would be great if I knew how to counter them. It would be an incredibly useful thing to know. Now, left-handed, right-handed is actually I've also made my player left-handed purely because I know left-handed players are a little bit more awkward to play against in real life. So I wondered if that factored in, but it's hard to know. This is all well and good, but in terms of rallies, shot type, wrong foot, sort of just trying to get them onto the opposite way that they're already running, or deviation is just more of a straightforward left and right situation. Center and deep are self-explanatory, really. Mixed plays has a bit of everything, or net approach tries to get you up there. But there tends to be an option, particularly on returns, in terms of risk of aiming down the lines, power, perverts, zoned, cross. I definitely thought there was I can't find it now, but there's definitely a way to put it on their weak point, which is unhelpful because I don't know what their weak point is. It just says weak point on here. But so certain things are a little bit confusing and a little bit possibly arbitrary because I don't know what this changes or how it helps or doesn't help. And there's not really much feedback on that front, as you will see. Now, you can simulate all the games, and that's the way they will probably play 99% of them. But for a final, you can sort of see the English as a second language here. Don't think about the consequences. Relax and just play how you know doing it. Relax and just play how you know, really. Or stay in that continuity. I mean, technically it's the correct as a sentence, but it's not the word you'd use. Build on what you did well in the previous games. Stay in that channel, stay in that mindset, basically. That's a big game today. This is a big game. It's sort of little things like that. The English as a second language thing is pretty obvious when you sort of keep seeing it. So depending on how much that bothers you, I'm just going to do that. It's built his confidence. Again, this seems to be a little bit pot luck. I'm sure if you kept doing it, you'd probably spot patterns. So here we are. playing off here. Now, there is sound for this, but for some reason I don't think it's actually coming through. But the music is just tennis noises, so it doesn't really matter all that much, any more than it does in Football Manager. Our player here has just smashed through his opening game, sorry. I do know terms. In terms of graphics, functional. I mean, it's better than Football Manager. It's obviously worse than F1 Manager, but they're not a particularly great sized team, I don't think. So, and for what they're having to represent, perfectly serviceable, as the suddenly just starts pouring down outside. I don't know if you can hear that, but the graphics are perfectly functional and they probably represent what's actually happening in the engine quite well. But at the same time, you can see statistics, 3D analysis. It's all very good, except tactical instructions you can change during the game. Early on in this, you get a report after a set saying he's very weak on his backhand. So, tell your player to target his backhand, and then literally nothing changes statistic-wise for the remainder of the game. So whether that's just your player is incapable of actually incorporating those changes, or the game doesn't do it. But there's motivational shouts, just like Football Manager. They're also just as unhelpful as Football Manager. In fact, probably actually even more so, because there's not even an obvious one to shout. You can do it, generally, does something. There's not a shout that always works when you're on top. There's not a shout that always works when you're below, which in a way is probably nicer that it's not a gameable system. But at the same time, I'd like it to be somewhere in between those 2 points of just utter potluck. Also, as for talk at the end of the set, seemingly doesn't do anything either. It just gives you another motivational talk with a good chance to sort of improve their confidence. But again, it's a list of options that anything could do anything. The intensity levels is something that I still haven't fully worked out how much of a difference they make. For instance, right now, he's just doing average on serve and return and there's bringing it up a little bit more on key points. Now, he's got a lot more stamina right now than his opponent, so we might be able to take advantage of that. Now, this is raced off in real time, really, for the first 4 games here. You can speed it up 10 times, which automatically puts you in the top-down camera, but it will interrupt you at game points, which is, on the one hand, nice, but if you're just trying to zoom through a game, annoying, because you can't just leave it and just get on with something else. You can't just have this on the side. You do have to give it your attention, because it will interrupt you every time there's a game point. As my player's just gone from 40-30 for them to advantage to him, it's interrupted it, and now he's actually broken the opponent. So, but 1 game later, 40 love, it's interrupted me again. Back to 50 times, interrupted me again because he failed the point, and so on and so forth. But there are top-down 3/4, and then CV is sort of just following your player around from behind. But I don't know what it stands for in this case, but court view maybe. But on their serve again, he's taken it to deuce, which means literally every time he goes to an advantage, it will interrupt us, which is done 5 times now, because nobody can actually claim this game. 7th time, 8th time, 9th time, 10th time, 11, and someone finally won the game. But you can see here, going on 50 times, the total time does go with it. Right now, 42 minutes have been played. Realistically, you're not going to be watching this in 1 times ever. First set goes to our player. And this is where you get recap. Now, I'll be completely honest, I'm pretty certain every time I've played a game, this has been the response. The opponent makes a difference with his forehand. Perhaps it'd be wise to play more to his backhand. Literally every time, that is the feedback. So continue on. Obviously, if you've asked him for a team talk at the end of that, then you'll get one of them. I might just bring up his intensity levels, just because he's got a little bit extra fatigue in him and it might end the game faster. I don't know. As our player there just loses a 40 love deal and gets broken, but breaks back twice in fact, and goes 4-2 up. And serving for the match now, 40 love. I've not changed anything tactically. Does a nice lovely short shift shot there, really. The dancing I don't quite get, but he wins this tournament. Wow, what a confrontation. That match was Dante-esque. Genuinely don't know what that means. You deserve it. Well done. I mean, it's the last game of the season, so meanwhile, Korda was a finalist, beaten by Fistheid, weirdly, in the fight between the top 8 players. But I think he still finishes the season in position 1. Meanwhile, Bailey picks up some useful points at the very end. And here's an interview request. And you'll see what I mean about... Unfortunately, none of these questions accidentally misgendered our player, but so I can't show you an example of that. Nor any of them particularly off language-wise either. This one has a little bit of a moment. It's a great accomplishment. It delights Matthew Bailey. Just weirdly third person's him, but there's work to do to keep a hold of this domination. It's a little clumsy, but, not awful. The rest of them are all fine there. And I have actually just reached experience level 7 of 9, which has improved my attributes a little bit in certain areas. I'm not very good on this section or this section. And actually, with our player being out of contract at the end of the year, it could be worthwhile sorting a new one out. By the way, there are also equipment supply contracts with arbitrary achievements. So if they get to, say, 30 ATP there or round 16 of a Grand Slam, they get a bit more of a payout. Or indeed, if they just play in a certain number of tournaments in a year. Revenue share is something you get per player, and it does seem to be largely focused on their ranking. So trying to sign a player in the top 20, you'll typically get about 10 to 15%. But similarly, they'll be getting to the good end of tournaments more often, so you get more money that way. This is the issue. I just signed Jack Draper this year. We already had two major players, Kudermetova and Korda, and Draper is worse than both of them, so I couldn't put them as a key player. I put him as a promising player, and he was okay with that. It just dropped a bunch of patience off him. So the jeopardy of that wasn't great, but I'll keep him as a promising player because he's not, top end. But what I'm likely going to do is renegotiate with Korda, take him to key player. He is world number one after all. And then replace Kudermetova with a top 20 female player and make them the other major player. Now, see, he wants to bring his donations down to 30%, and it goes, are you joking? So that might be a bit of a problem. There's also a World Cup system where you can sign for an international one and do the what is effectively the Davis Cup, but I don't bother with it just because it's an annoyance in the middle. Here's another one of those examples by my coach did what it took for me to reach my goals. Did what it takes, I think is what it's meant to try and say there. But so Bailey ended up one off his top 50 ranking, and therefore I gave him a pretty solid satisfaction. Still can't try and do his contract though. So there does seem to be a limit on that. Same with coaches. You get this notification. None of these staff members I'm willing to continue with. I think I can improve on all of them. One thing I will mention here is the supplier goals for equipment-wise, which we just showed you there, can be useful. For instance, Korda's earnings were 2.6 million effectively through his equipment stuff, which can make a massive deal in terms of the finances of your academy here. Whereas Kudermetova could have won up to 5 million, only made 1.4. Not awful, but a lot more room there. The good news is, on the day of it actually expiring, you do get another opportunity to do this. And now that he will not really budge off that revenue share, apparently won't even take 30 now. I'm not going to do anything with her because she's just struggling to get through. But that's Tennis Manager. I'll get new objectives when the new season starts. Ultimately, I think this weirdly is a management game that doesn't really depend on your level of interest in the sport itself. Because the details are kind of there for you to pick and choose. Your ability to kind of understand the very specifics of the way tennis matches are played, the way the players target and make shots. I don't think it really matters all that much because I've just set up, for instance, I'm passively interested in tennis. I understand the concept of drop shots, smashes. I know the terminology. And yet I just set up these game plans and just left them and click through and see how my players did. Side note, by the way, Golf Manager, ready and waiting for that, quite frankly. Just do one in the same mold as this. I think overall, this is a game that you play, you put an afternoon in, say, every other week. I don't think it's particularly something that you play every day and just go many, many moons into the future. I think you set up an academy, say, and then play a season at a time and maybe go probably a dozen seasons, probably at most. I don't think the longevity is massively there. The replayability, I don't think is massively there. But functionally, it does a lot of things right, but its flaws are fairly obvious. The transparency of what your decisions do is probably its biggest drawback. There's not a lot of clarity in, if I do this, then this is what's going to happen. Or indeed, there's not a lot of confirmation that the decisions you've made have made a difference. Sort of in the same way that on Football Manager, say, if your team is struggling with possession, then you bring down the tempo, you bring down the passing length and see if that brings up your possession stats. And there's, statistics that prove that. In this, for instance, it says, play to the opponent's backhand. You tell them to play to your opponent's backhand, and the statistics seem to still pan out the same. It's not a very obvious cause and effect in a lot of places. Whether that's going to be frustrating or not, probably down to the player. But for me, I've been happy to click through 5 seasons. I've been frustrated when players have just dipped out of tournaments they should have been winning, or dipped out of early rounds of tournaments against opponents they shouldn't have been losing to, and then I revel in the wins that they do have. So I think there's a certain amount of connection to the players that you bring in, to the degree that I will actually just reset this actually now and make sure I sign that person for the future because he is the created player for this save, which might mean I have to forfeit that title. But so I think there's a certain amount of connectedness you get through your players in your academy, but it's almost just kind of a passive, make sure they're in the right tournaments. It is actually probably arguably the most management sim possible in the sense that you are so hands-off, really, that it doesn't matter. One thing I did forget to just cover there, actually, was if we go on training, there is a training system that is actually probably the thing with the most clarity, in the sense that it shows you exactly the positives and the negatives. The negatives, obviously, the level of fatigue that it brings into your players. The positives of what it's focusing on and developing. In terms of their attributes here, you'll get weekly reports saying this has gone up this much, and it's just sort of a bar system. This is probably the one bit that does actually have the most obvious cause and effect to you. So whilst I am saying overall there's a bit of lack of clarity, in certain areas it's actually quite strong, but in terms of game plans, that's where it's not as obvious how effective what you're doing is. Overall, I would say at full price, if you're on the fence, probably wait for it to be on sale. If you really like your management sims, pick it up. If you're sort of, a little bit there, I would probably wait for it to be on sale. Quite frankly, I'm not quite sure it justifies its full price tag as such. If you're not going to be putting in, many seasons, I think it's actually technically more expensive than Football Manager, or close to being as expensive as Football Manager is these days. I know it's not necessarily the right thing to do to compare, but when it comes to sort of minutes per pound, shall we say, I think the Football Manager has the edge there. But if you can get this at a sensible price, definitely worth it. And I will say this, you will start rooting for the players that you pick up in the game in real life. I followed Corda through Wimbledon, obviously not at the tail end of that, but, he did respectably. So, and you will have that thing, just like in Football Manager, where you'll see teams and like, oh, I remember them. You'll have exactly the same thing with the players in this. If there's a nemesis that your players keep losing to, and you'll have that intense hatred that you'll have for them in the game, in real life, like, why am I not liking that player? And then you remember, because they kept beating your player in here. So pick it up if you can. You'll probably have a good time. Thank you for joining me. If you enjoyed this, like, comment, subscribe. You know the deal. Until next time, ta-ra.